In fall 2016, I moved into half of a really old house. It was built in the 1880s, close to the original campus of Indiana University. The area around the old campus had turned into a park, but it was filled with homeless people and drug addicts. The owners of the house turned it into a strange duplex. My friend had lived there before me, and he claimed it was haunted. But I didn't believe him. He was a bit of an odd guy. The layout of the house was strange. When you walked in the door, you were in a living room-like space. Then, if you kept walking, there was a doorway to a bedroom. Past that was the kitchen. There were no doors except for the one to the bathroom and the one that led to the shared basement. My first night there was uneventful. I felt a little uncomfortable because I hadn't lived by myself in a long time. I was feeling lonely and on edge. I stayed up late and eventually fell asleep. But I woke up again around 3 in the morning. It's a cliche, I know. What woke me up was the sound of drumming. It sounded like a group of drummers were drumming on every flat surface of the living room. It went on for a while, and I was completely terrified. It was just a cacophony. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I finally gathered up the courage to get up and check on it. As soon as I passed the threshold to the living room, it just stopped. Nothing happened for the rest of the night, but I didn't get much sleep. A couple of days later, a friend was visiting. He was about to leave. We were standing by the front door next to my bookshelf. I told him about how I was having trouble sleeping and the story from the first night. As I was saying this, a book threw itself off the bookshelf and onto the floor 3 feet away. It had to fly past the dresser the shelf was perched on and landed between the two of us. He just gave me a creeped out look and said he had to go. I don't blame him. Eventually, I asked the guy in the other half of the duplex what was up. He had lived there for 8 years. He told me that no one stayed longer than a year, and they all reported the same stuff. For whatever reason, he said nothing ever happened on his side. It didn't make sense, but there it was. I tried to brush it off as my imagination played tricks on me. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. Every night, I would hear strange noises. Sometimes it sounded like whispers coming from the walls. Other times, it was the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth in the hallway outside my bedroom. I started to feel like I was being watched all the time. Whenever I was alone in the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was lurking in the shadows just out of sight. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a loud banging coming from the basement. It sounded like someone was pounding on the walls with a sledgehammer. I hesitated for a moment, then gathered up my courage and went to investigate. As I descended the creaky stairs to the basement, the banging grew louder and more frantic. My heart was pounding in my chest as I reached the bottom step and stepped into the dimly lit room. But to my surprise, there was nothing there. The room was empty, except for some old boxes and furniture covered in dusty sheets. The banging had stopped as suddenly as it had started. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with that house. It was like there was a dark presence lurking in every corner, just waiting to strike. I tried to ignore it and go about my daily routine, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the feeling of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. One evening, as I was cooking dinner in the kitchen, I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the bedroom. I dropped what I was doing and ran to investigate, my heart racing with fear. But when I reached the bedroom, there was no one there. The room was empty, and the only sound was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. The strange occurrences were happening more and more frequently, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being tormented by something beyond my understanding. I knew I had to get out of that house, but I couldn't afford to move. I felt trapped, like a prisoner in my own home. Then one night, things took a turn for the worse. I was awoken from a fitful sleep by the sound of whispering coming from the walls. It was like 100 voices speaking at once, their words unintelligible but filled with malice and hatred. I felt a chill run down my spine as I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. And then suddenly, the whispering stopped, and I heard a low, guttural growling coming from the foot of my bed. I turned on the bedside lamp, expecting to see some kind of wild animal lurking in the darkness. But what I saw was far worse. Standing at the foot of my bed was a figure shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Its mouth was twisted into a cruel grin, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape the terror that gripped me. But I was frozen in place, unable to move or even breathe. And then, with a sudden burst of speed, the figure lunged towards me, its clawed hands reaching out to grab me. I closed my eyes and braced myself for the end, but nothing happened. When I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone, and I was alone in the darkness once more. I knew then that I had to leave that house, no matter the cost. I packed my bags and fled into the night, leaving behind the nightmares that haunted me in that cursed place. To this day, I still don't know what lurked in the shadows of that old house, and I pray that I never find out. But one thing is for certain. I will never forget the horrors that I witnessed there, and I will never set foot in that house again. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, Please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. When I was a solo driver, I was making a delivery in Memphis, TN. It was a hot summer evening, and the sun was setting over the city, casting a golden glow over the streets. I had been driving for hours, and my GPS led me to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a sense of unease settling in. The building seemed abandoned, and the only sound was the creaking of old wooden crates in the wind. I grabbed my clipboard and stepped out of the truck, feeling the warm air envelop me. The receiver, a gruff-looking man with a thick beard, met me at the loading dock. He signed for the delivery, and I began to unload the cargo. But as the hours ticked by, he kept me waiting, claiming there was an issue with the paperwork. As the clock struck 7, my driving time was up. I needed to find a place to park for my mandatory 10-hour reset. The receiver suggested I head to the nearby TA Petro truck stop in West Memphis, just across the state line. I thanked him and climbed back into my rig, feeling frustrated and tired. The drive to the truck stop was uneventful, but as I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed it was eerily quiet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I parked in the very back, where the darkness seemed to swallow my truck whole. My dog, Noodles, a scruffy little terrier, whined in the passenger seat, sensing my unease. I took Noodles out for a quick walk, and as we strolled through the deserted lot, I noticed a man standing behind a trailer, just staring into space. His presence sent a shiver down my spine, and I quickened my pace, hurrying Noodles back to the safety of the truck. After settling Noodles in, I grabbed my dinner bag and headed to the truck stop's restaurant. As I walked, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I turned to see the same man from the trailer following me at a distance. My heart raced, and I picked up my pace, weaving through the parked trucks. But no matter how many turns I took, he kept pace with me, always lurking just out of sight. I pushed open the door to the restaurant, grateful for the warm glow and bustling atmosphere inside. The place was packed, and I slid onto a stool at the bar, ordering a burger and fries. As I waited for my food, I glanced around, searching for the mysterious man, but he was nowhere to be seen. Halfway through my meal, nature called, and I excused myself to use the restroom. When I returned, my fork was on the right side of my plate. I'm left-handed, and I always place my utensils on the left. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had touched my food. I called the waitress over, still standing behind my chair, and asked if she had messed with my meal. She denied it, and I asked if she'd seen anyone else near my plate. She shook her head, too busy to notice anything. I requested the manager, and when he arrived, I told him about the strange man and my tampered food. But the manager's expression turned serious, and he offered to replace my meal and move me to a safer seat. As I waited for my new food to arrive, he disappeared into the office and returned with a stern look. "I reviewed the camera feed," he said, "and a man did indeed approach your plate while you were in the restroom. He added something to your mashed potatoes, stirred it, and left the building." My skin crawled. The manager offered to call the police, and I agreed, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. As I finished my new meal, the manager sat down across from me, his eyes scanning the restaurant. "I don't want you to leave alone," he said. "The police will escort you to your truck." Before long, 2 officers arrived, taking statements and searching the premises. They found no sign of the mysterious man, but promised to keep an eye on the truck stop. One of the officers offered to drive me back to my rig, and as we walked through the dark lot, I felt a sense of gratitude toward these kind strangers. As we reached my truck, the officer told me his partner would keep watch over the lot all night, ensuring my safety. I thanked them both, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The night had been long and terrifying, but thanks to the kindness of strangers, I made it through unscathed. As I settled in for the night, Noodles curled up beside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mysterious man was still out there, watching and waiting. But with the police keeping watch, I felt a sense of security, and eventually my eyelids grew heavy, and I drifted off. When I was about 13, I spent the night over at my cousin's house. It was a small, cozy place tucked away in the countryside, surrounded by tall trees and darkness. My cousin and I were home alone for the night, as his parents were out of town. We were thrilled at the prospect of staying up late, playing video games until the early hours of the morning. As the night grew darker, we huddled together in his room, the glow of the TV screen casting eerie shadows on the walls. The only sounds were the clicking of buttons and the occasional creak of the old house settling. I was engrossed in the game, sitting on the edge of the bed, when suddenly my cousin got up to use the restroom. I barely noticed his absence, too focused on the game to pay much attention. But then I felt something behind me, a presence in the room that shouldn't have been there. Without thinking, I turned to speak to my cousin, but he wasn't there. Confusion washed over me as I scanned the empty room. That's when I noticed it, the faint impression on the bed where someone had been sitting just moments before. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I realized I wasn't alone. I called out for my cousin, but there was no response. Fear crept into my mind as I considered the possibility of something sinister lurking in the darkness. I hesitated to look under the bed or in the closet, fearing what I might find. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Hours passed and my cousin still hadn't returned from the restroom. Anxiety gnawed at me as I debated whether to leave the safety of the room to search for him. Eventually, curiosity and concern got the better of me, and I ventured out into the dimly lit hallway. The house seemed different at night, stranger, more ominous. Shadows danced along the walls, and every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down my spine. I called out for my cousin again, but there was no response. I made my way to the bathroom, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was closed, and I hesitated before knocking softly. "Cousin?" I whispered, hoping for a reply. Silence greeted me, and a sense of dread washed over me. With trembling hands, I pushed open the door, bracing myself for what I might find. But the bathroom was empty, no sign of my cousin anywhere. Panic surged through me as I realized he was gone, vanished without a trace. Frantically, I searched the rest of the house, calling out his name into the darkness, but there was no response. As the minutes turned into hours, I began to fear the worst. What if something had happened to him? What if there was someone or something else in the house with us? With each passing moment, my fear grew, until it felt like it would consume me entirely. I was on the verge of tears when I heard it, a whisper echoing through the darkness. "Help me." The voice was faint, barely audible above the sound of my pounding heart, but it sent chills down my spine, filling me with a sense of dread, unlike anything I had ever felt before. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing through the empty house. It led me to the basement, a place I had always found unsettling, even in the light of day. As I descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and a sense of unease settled over me like a thick fog. I hesitated at the bottom, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen for any sign of life. And then I heard it, the sound of someone crying. It was coming from the far corner of the room, hidden in the shadows. I approached slowly, my footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. And then I saw him, my cousin, huddled in the corner, his face streaked with tears. Relief washed over me as I rushed to his side, wrapping my arms around him in a tight embrace. "What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. My cousin looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," he whispered. "I was in the restroom and then something grabbed me. Something cold and inhuman." I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened to his words. Whatever had happened to him, it was something beyond my comprehension, something dark and malevolent. Together, we made our way back upstairs, our hearts still racing with fear. We locked ourselves in his room, too afraid to venture out into the unknown. And as the night wore on, we huddled together, clinging to each other for comfort, knowing that whatever had happened to us, we would never be the same again. It was a dark, chilly evening, and I was driving alone on the deserted road. My job as a delivery driver often took me through remote areas like this, but I never felt uneasy before. As I cruised down the empty highway, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw a woman sitting in the passenger seat of a car next to me. Her hair was twisted into a tight bun, just like Miss Trunchbull from that movie. But what caught my attention was her terrified expression. She stared at me with wide eyes, as if she had seen a ghost. Before I could react, the car abruptly veered off at the next exit, leaving me bewildered. I shook my head, trying to shake off the eerie feeling creeping up my spine. But the encounter lingered in my mind as I continued my journey. About half an hour later, another car pulled up alongside me. This time, the driver was different, but the woman in the passenger seat was the same. Her hair was still in that tight bun, and her expression remained frozen in fear. It was unnerving to see her again, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to pull over at the next rest stop to report the strange sightings to the authorities. But before I could make a move, the car disappeared into the darkness. I cursed under my breath, feeling frustrated and helpless. I continued driving, my senses on high alert. Hours passed, and I was nearing London when it happened again. The same car, the same woman, the same terrified expression. But this time, something was different. She seemed to be screaming at me, her mouth forming silent words of desperation. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched her. Without hesitation, I pulled over into a nearby lay-by and dialed the emergency number. My heart raced as I recounted the bizarre encounters to the dispatcher. To my relief, they informed me that they had received similar reports from other drivers in the area. As I waited for the authorities to arrive, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that engulfed me. What was happening? Who was the woman in the car, and why did she look so terrified? Minutes felt like hours, as I sat alone in the darkness, the only sound being the distant hum of passing cars. When the police finally arrived, I eagerly shared every detail of my encounters with them. But despite their efforts, They couldn't find any trace of the mysterious woman or the car. I drove home that night with a heavy heart, haunted by the memory of the woman's terrified face. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had witnessed something otherworldly, something beyond my comprehension. In the days that followed, I scoured the news for any mention of the strange sightings, but there was nothing. It was as if the encounters had never happened, as if I had imagined it all. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was something sinister lurking on that desolate highway, something that defied logic and reason. And though I tried to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had come face to face with the supernatural that night. From that day on, I avoided driving alone on deserted highways, always keeping an eye out for any sign of the mysterious woman with the haunted expression. But no matter how far I drove, her image remained etched in my mind, a chilling reminder of the night I encountered something beyond my understanding. As I look back on that fateful night, I couldn't help but wonder, was it all just a coincidence? Or had I stumbled upon a glimpse of the unknown? A glimpse of the things that lurk in the shadows, unseen and unexplained. I was home alone for the week, as my family had gone on vacation while I had to stay and work. It was around 2 a.m., and I'd stayed up to watch a scary movie in the dark in my basement. I was intent on really scaring myself and seeing how far into terror I could go, while still knowing I was safe in my own home. It was then that I heard pounding footsteps on the first floor. This was a common annoying occurrence when my family was home. I heard their footsteps every time they passed through the front hallway, past the basement door. This time, fear immediately shot through me at the sound. My reflex was to turn the television off immediately. The basement door was up a flight of steps and around a corner, so whoever it was would not have seen any light. I heard the basement door handle click and turn as I sat in darkness. I moved slowly to be silent and crawled behind our large television. As I passed it inch by inch, I noted with panic that its black screen still dimly glowed. I heard footsteps coming down the carpeted but creaky stairs. I froze in my hiding place, listening. For many long minutes, I heard nothing. Had the intruder seen the television's afterglow, or had it faded in time? Was he standing in the pitch dark listening for me? I seemed to lie there in total silence for an interminably long time. My panic began to fade, and I began to think more clearly. Had I heard an intruder? Could someone possibly be standing there in silence for so long without making any noise? The basement was so exceedingly quiet that the silence itself began to hurt my ears. Could the unknown person avoid any noise from shuffling or breathing or anything else? If there was an intruder, he was still in the basement because the creaky stairs were incredibly loud. The door handle clicked, and he wouldn't know to mask his footsteps on the first floor so that they couldn't be heard down here. I began counting in my head, trying to pass the time, as drool fell from my mouth onto the carpet. I didn't dare risk the sound of swallowing. I reached 60 seconds once, twice, 30 times, 60 times. By now my fear had faded and I was more confused than anything. I estimated I'd been crouched in the absolute black for almost 2 hours and had still heard nothing. If there was an intruder, none of this made sense. Finally, I decided I'd have to make a move. If I did nothing, eventually the sun would come up and shine in through the small basement windows. And worse, I began to smell something horrible and cloying. Slowly, ever so, I began inching my way towards the stairs by way of the walls. If someone was standing there in the dark, I should be able to go around them and then make a break up the stairs. Meanwhile, the horrible odor grew stronger. Had something died down here in the night? No living person would smell like that. Terrible images of some sort of corpse monster listening for me in the dark erupted in my thoughts, and I moved as fast as I could without making a sound. Just as I finally approached the stairs, there was an enormous clatter, as if something falling or collapsing on the floor. It was at that moment I leaped forward and crashed up the stairs, running out through the open basement door and my wide-open front door. Now certain that someone was in the house, I called the police from my cell phone and watched my house from afar. The police came, checked inside the house, and then grimly came back out to question me. They'd found a body in the house, my elderly neighbor, who seemed to have died of a heart attack. They believed that I must have left the front door unlocked, and he must have wandered into my house while dying, looking for help. At first, I felt horrible, thinking that I had sat there in the dark while the old man died a few feet away. Then it occurred to me, what the hell was that loud noise of things falling? That last prompted me to bolt up the stairs and out of the house. I asked the police, and they confirmed the back door of my house had been left open as well, near a single bare footprint in the mud. Somehow, for some reason I'll never know, there was someone else in that basement with us. Silent, waiting, and listening in the dark over the fresh corpse of an old man.